this government's got an uncanny knack of ignoring what's important and concentrating on what makes headlines. For example, now we should be looking at GDP. We are being exhorted by the government to concentrate on our DPs. So the G is being forgotten from the GDP, only look at the GP. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, sir. Chairperson, Madam. I stand here today on behalf of my party, the All India Trinamool Congress, to speak on the Energy Conservation Bill 2020, which seeks to amend the older Act of 2001. I would like to begin by quoting the late US President Jimmy Carter, who said, "Every act of energy conservation is more than just common sense. I tell you, it is an act of patriotism." Indians traditionally have lived by the motto, "Money saved is money earned." This holds entirely true for energy. Energy saved is energy earned. Energy conservation or energy efficiency might be one of the most important factors going forward in India's sustainable growth. Now, what are some of the main things that this bill seeks to do, as stated in the objects and reasons? I'm going to try and explain the 2 or 3 main things very simply. Number one, this bill adds large residential buildings. What are large residential buildings? Those with a connected load of 100 kilowatts or with contracted demand of 120 kV. Brings it into the ambit of this Act. Previously, this was only for DISCOMs and for commercial buildings. The second thing that it does is, currently only DISCOMs had a mandate to purchase renewable energy. With this amendment, this is going to be extended to industry. So, for example, an industry like, say, a cement plant has to buy 25% renewable power. Now, cement is a RTC process, round-the-clock process. It's a continuous process industry. Solar energy is only available for a certain time. So, this cement plant can't meet all its needs from buying renewable energy. So, what can it do? It can buy carbon-traded certificates instead of purchasing renewable. And somebody like the solar... Oh, shoot. Can you hear? Okay. Yeah, we can hear. Okay, go ahead. So, because it's 24/7 continuous process industry and solar is available only for daytime. So, the cement plant can buy carbon-traded certificates instead of purchasing renewables. And companies like the Solar Energy Corporation of India can sell these certificates. The third thing is, this bill allows the government to mandate utilization of a minimum amount of a specific renewable. So, for example, you can say that this is an oil refinery. This oil refinery is mandated to utilize 10% green hydrogen. Or you can say a fertilizer industry is mandated to use 10% green ammonia. Now, the promotion of green hydrogen is a good forward-looking objective. There's no doubt about that. But there are simpler goals that can be achieved with far superior outcomes. For example, India worked on this LED lighting revolution, and we need a similar revolution in solar heating and solar pumps. The concept of carbon trading markets, rules on renewable usage by DISCOMs is doing nothing to incentivize solar pumps and solar heating. The Honorable Prime Minister's mission is a home for all under Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, which is a great scheme. But this essentially means that all those citizens will expect to have cooling in their homes, whether it's a fan, whether it's an air cooler, whether it's an air conditioner, at least in the summer. So we need to talk about cooling equity. Nobody is talking about cooling equity. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that by the year 2100, that's 80 years away, the need for electricity for power cooling is going to go up by 30 times what it was in 2000. Now, this is a global statistic. India's Ministry of Environment's ozone cell has already talked about cooling goals in the India Cooling Action Plan, ICAP. They had a very comprehensive report published in March 2019, and an honourable member of this House, Dr. Harshvardhan, was then the minister. And he signed off on the report, and it's a very comprehensive report. The plan, this ICAP, seeks to reduce cooling demand by 20 to 25% by 2037-2038. But this current amendment doesn't take cooling demand into consideration. The bill's only talking about large residential buildings. The reality is that we need to have a focus on passive cooling. What is passive cooling? When you're designing a building, you need buildings that utilize shading, that utilize other techniques. And we need to incentivize the use of 5-star energy-saving air conditioners, solar heaters, solar pumps. None of this is coming under the purview of this Act. The same India Cooling Action Report says that the aggregated nationwide cooling demand, this is something that is measured in tonnage of refrigeration, TR. It is going to grow 8 times in 2037-38 as compared to 17-18 baseline. So in years' time, it is going to grow 8 times. Building sector cooling demand that you're talking about, building sector cooling demand will grow 11 times. Cold storage chain cooling demand will grow by 4 times. Transport air conditioning will grow by 5 times. Now, when you say that this is a green building, how is air conditioning in most buildings done? If you think about residential buildings, most of us live in residential buildings. It is not something that the builder does. It is not something that the government does. Air conditioning is put by individual consumers. So I buy it, you buy it, and then we fit it in our homes. So 8% of current households currently in India have air conditioners. Now this is anticipated to rise to 21% by 27-28. So in another 5 years' time, 21% of India's homes are going to use air conditioners. In 15 years' time, 40% of India's homes are going to use air conditioners. So what do we need to do? Currently, there's an Oxford India Sustainability Center. They've come out with a study that says that 40% of air conditioners being used in India today have 3-star energy efficiency. We need to make sure that all air conditioners sold, there is an incentive for R&D, incentive for manufacturers to progressively improve, for 5-star AC units to be available and for people to be incentivized to buy them. And solar-based cooling technologies should be given a big R&D focus because we are not focusing on cooling technologies. If you're talking about rural households, there's air coolers and there's ceiling fans. So even ceiling fans and air coolers, we have something known as a Bureau of Energy Efficiency, the BEE. Today when you go to the market, for example, if you go to Kotla market and you're trying to buy a fan or you're trying to buy a cooler, there is no BEE stamp on all of them. So we have to make sure everything available to the consumer, even in terms of non-air conditioning, so that fans and coolers have a BEE stamp. When you read the ICAP report, it spoke of long-term, medium-term and short-term recommendations. I'm just going to look at the short-term recommendation. It says very clearly that India needs to recognize cooling as a national thrust area and promote R&D for cooling. It needs to facilitate research for energy-efficient cooling technologies. I don't find any mention of this in the current amendment at all. Now, there's one very important thing we need to concentrate on. Most of India's cooling requirement occurs between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. This is the time when people come home after work, families sit together. This is when the fan is on, the air conditioner is on, the air cooler is on. Now, when we are talking of renewable energy and we are concentrating on solar energy, please understand, solar energy is only available during the day. So we need to shift the availability of storage of solar energy to the 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. slot. So while we need to create solar, we need to create peak storage battery, 4-hour peak storage battery to store that solar. We need to create pump storage hydro, grid scale batteries to shift the availability of solar to the 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. time when people need it. Otherwise, it's useless because the time when people need it is not when renewable energy is being made available. Now, when you see India's size, India is a vast country, and there's perhaps no other country in the world as big as India which has only one time zone. Now, there's a study by the CSIR National Physics Laboratory, and it's a scientific study, which says there's a huge benefit to evaluating, at least let us evaluate the idea of 2 time zones for India, one for the Northeast region. So Assam onwards, Northeast and Andaman and Nicobar, because in the evenings in winter, sun rises at 5 or 6 a.m. and sets as early as 4 p.m. Government offices start at 10 a.m. So you have that peak time in the morning where energy is wasted. In the evening, in the northeastern part of India, you are needing electricity from 4 p.m. for lighting. In the rest of India, you're needing it at 6 p.m. So again, you see the circadian rhythm of people plus the energy needs are different. And perhaps the idea of making that part of India GMT plus 1, GMT plus 6.5 as opposed to us which are GMT plus 5.5 for the rest of India would be beneficial, and the study actually says it would result in an annual saving of approximately 2.7 billion units of electricity. This is a study which is there by the CSIR National Physics Lab. So I think there's a critical need to implement it both urgently in terms of both health and energy conservation. Now let's look at the bill from the perspective of industry, because we are encouraging industry to actively produce renewable energy and to promote renewable energy. So but what are we doing to make things easier for industry? Number one, the biggest challenge is policy consistency. The regulatory framework for renewables, the procedures are different from state to state. So the definition of the RPO, the renewable purchase obligation, differs from state to state. So this, for a company which is operating pan-India, it's creating a huge risk of investment because your different standards are there for every state. Now, the policies are available for 5 years. Again, you have an investment risk. You don't know what's going to happen in 5 years' time. You look at biomass. Biomass doesn't even have a comprehensive framework. The state electricity regulatory commissions, they have delayed payments. Now, the developers then have to get into a debt trap because they're not getting their payments cleared in time from the SERCs. For captive solar producers, a consistent metering policy is a must. There is no consistent metering policy for captive solar producers. When we come to GST, the government previously had 5% GST on renewable energy equipment. Now they have increased it to 12%. If you look at the last 18 months, the price of PV modules, photovoltaic modules, which are used in solar panels, have increased 40 to 50%. So when you're looking at domestic solar engineering, domestic solar procurement, construction, basically the solar EPC market, this has all been hit. This is something we need to look at seriously. Infrastructure. Now there is insufficient integration between the grid and between renewable projects. So the grid is producing the renewable energy. The State Electricity Regulatory Commission is not being able to use all the generated power. So we need the transmission infra to be ahead of the renewable generation infra. We are producing it, the transmission is not being able to pick it up. This is important, this integration. Then we go to overdependence on solar. We know there's an allocation of about rupees 19,500 crores to facilitate domestic solar manufacturing. This is a great thing. Currently, 80% of dependence is on one country, China. 80%. So we need to include provisions in our policies to bring wind energy at par with solar energy. Because most manufacturing for wind energy is domestic. We can also look at mini hydro. Of course, there's a lot of untapped potential in mini hydro. There are some environmental issues that need to be examined. And we also need to promote biomass as an alternative energy source. What's happening now with using only solar is RTC, which is round the clock. We are not getting round the clock in renewable power. This is something that can only be done with a hybrid mix of hydro, wind, and solar. And the next thing we come to is storage. Now, India, again, the same thing. The demand for the time of when the demand for the energy is and the time that energy is produced, there's a lag. So what do we need? We need storage. India would need about a dozen gigawatt scale factories with an average capacity of 10 gigawatt hour at least. So the government needs to support R&D and local battery manufacturing to scale up. This is something that is the need of the hour. Green hydrogen. We've talked of green hydrogen. Currently, 95% of energy produced, hydrogen produced is grey hydrogen, which is from natural gas. So there are technological challenges for transportation and for the usage. So a major R&D effort and investment is required in the green hydrogen space. It's not going to be easy to shift overnight from 95% grey hydrogen to green hydrogen. Now, it's a good bill. It's a step in the right direction. But this government's got an uncanny knack of ignoring what's important and concentrating on what makes headlines. For example, now we should be looking at GDP. We are being exhorted by the government to concentrate on our DPs. So the G is being forgotten from the GDP, only look at the GP. So let's not make the same mistake with energy conservation. There's plenty of good work done by various ministries. I myself have read 2 very comprehensive reports, not by your ministry but by others. I would really urge that those recommendations are encompassed into this amendment. So in conclusion, we've got to be really serious about energy conservation and about encouraging energy conservation, and it's not just enough to be a government of gas bags. We've got to do more than that. Thank you very much.